Welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we have a very special guest. We have Ann Larson. Her writing on education, debt, and low wage work has appeared in The New Republic, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Fast Company, and The Nation, among other publications. She's the co-author of Can't Pay, Won't Pay, The Case for Economic Disobedience and Debt Abolition, and is a fellow with the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. And her new book, available June 9th, is called Clean Up on Aisle 5: Essential Work, Poverty Wages, and the View from Behind the Supermarket Register. And it's such a pleasure to have you on, and thank you for being with us today.
Hey, it's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so this is a great story. Well, I mean, it's a great story in the way that it's told, but it's a really fascinating
Mm,
story. So in the book, Anne wrote, based on, and this the beginning is going to be funny.
mm,
So based on the location of the offending shit, we both knew what had happened. The code to access the public restroom was printed on the bottom of every receipt and given out only to paying customers. It was common for people who weren't shoppers to wait outside the door so they could grab it when someone exited.
mm,
But this time, no one had opened the door quickly enough. When I got to my register, colleagues were discussing the incident. Some saw what happened as an unfortunate consequence of circumstances outside of the man's control. One said, quote unquote, he was probably homeless and in an emergency situations. Others were furious that a customer had defiled our workplace. It felt like a personal affront. George, a security guard, asked which side of the split I was on. Everyone has to shit somewhere, I said, shrugging. It was my way of defending the man. George was in the other camp. A janitor had to clean it up, he snapped. George had a point. He was saying that employees had to stay on guard because we never knew what unsavory tasks might be assigned next. We were employed in a non union store in Utah, a right to work state where legal barriers made worker organizing difficult. Without clear rules around roles and obligations, the next time it could be any one of us bleaching the floors. So, this to me is probably because there are several poignant parts of the book, but this to me is the most, is because, as we're looking at just jobs in general, but obviously especially low wage work, I think the question comes up of where should we sort of where should we place our empathy, right? Who should be kind of the sort of focal point of our attention? And I'm sure as you were writing the book, there was probably a part of you that's thinking, okay, for the most part, we kind of struggle with how much empathy and sympathy to give because we have so much of it to give, right? However, this environment shows the complexity of what it's like being a low wage worker and the complexity of just honestly what it's like being in customer service. So, can you kind of talk about that? So, tell us a little about kind of the experience, obviously, you doing this, you working in the supermarket, but then also like, how do we figure out how much sort of responsibility slash sympathy, how much sort of everything should we allocate and to whom and why?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that introduction. So the passage that you read is from the opening of the book where I get to work, and just a couple of months into the job, and an employee, a colleague, tells me that a guy shit on the floor today, um,
yeah.
and he was trying to get into the bathroom, as a lot of homeless people did, but the door didn't open in time, and so he shit on the floor, and it created this split in the store. And this is the incident that sort of encouraged me to, okay, I started thinking I need to take some notes. I need to start thinking about the supermarket's a more complicated place than I had realized, and I need to think about writing about this, or at least paying more close attention. And it really you put you put your finger on it there. I was primed, I think, as a you know in the book, I explain I come from a working class background. In high school, I bagged groceries. In college, my dad used to work at a supermarket when I was a kid. So it wasn't that I had no experience of being working class or working a manual labor job, but for the past couple decades, I had been in more middle class, white collar work professions, and so I had a different class experience than a lot of the people that I worked with, and
Hmm.
that primed me, I think, for being sympathetic to this homeless person who had shit on the floor. And that was sort of my default. I wasn't yet, even though I worked at the store, just like the security guard who snapped at me. I wasn't yet in that world enough to see that what had happened was actually a labor issue.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of my colleagues recognized that immediately, right? So it introduced to me that this class difference that was really a split between people in the store. In terms of who we should sympathize with, one of the themes of the book is like the supermarket is a split screen. On the one hand, you have the supermarket's a community resource. It's a wonderful place. People go in for food and all kinds of things, and they come in and the community center. Old people walk the aisles for exercise, and your
Yeah.
cashier knows your kids' names, and there's all sorts of pleasures, frankly, of working in a grocery store. Even customer service can be quite pleasurable, but the supermarket on the other side of the split screen also has this dark side.
Hmm.
In addition to the low pay and poor conditions, which I'm sure we'll talk about, there's a sense that supermarkets are filling in for a lack of public services, a lack of civic institutions, a lack of places where people can go to receive, to use a bathroom, to get some therapy, to get air conditioned in the sweltering summer, all these types of things. So the supermarket is kind of it's a private business, but it's kind of filled in a lot of these holes that we have in our public life. And so this incident with the shitting on the floor also reveals that. And what it shows is that, honestly, obviously, the homeless person who doesn't have a bathroom is worthy of our sympathy, but
Yeah.
so are the workers who have to clean up the mess.
Hmm.
And so the supermarket is sort of this concentrated place where these social tensions play out, and where a lot of the people that are actually responsible for this situation are let off the hook.
Hmm.
And it's funny that you mentioned, yeah, like who is responsible for that situation, really. I mean, it's funny how there was that split and people are kind of arguing at the store. They're like, is it the homeless person's fault? Is it the security guard? Is it, someone else? But it's funny how everybody there is kind of fighting with each other when the real problem is kind of, if you zoom out, kind of a systemic sort of
That's
issue.
right.
And it's hard to do that when you're in it, when you're in that moment. But it's funny how it's that becomes apparent when you kind of stop to think about it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so just to add on to that, so
Yeah.
I think for the most part, for all of us, because we're very, I guess, very rigid, right? So a lot of us struggle with black and white thinking, and I think when we see these things, right, we try to sort of pin people, pin ideas against each other, right? And so there's a sort of, because you talked about private businesses, and there's this idea of like obviously collectivism and obviously individualism, right? And then we have sort of individual freedom versus like I guess some form of collectivism or kind of forced responsibility or whatever. But the interesting thing is what your book sort of challenges us to think about, right? And to think about deeply is how intertwined and how kind of connected all of these ideas are. That fundamentally you can't really escape one extreme with another. And so, like an example of this that sort of comes to mind now is the idea you mentioned of individual rights, right? So you say that, like, okay, as a country, obviously in the U.S., we're really big on individual rights, right? So you and obviously mentioned, like, let's say private businesses, right? But the interesting thing is something like a private business obviously has a collective component to it because obviously the community shops there, right? So the community comes there for more things than just like 10 million cereals or whatever, right? So they come there for comforts, they come there for air conditioning, they come there for obviously community. So the point is to say, like, we have these sort of intertwined ideas, and I would wonder why is it, do you think, that it's so hard for us to see something like that? That, like, even though, let's say for example, we're a country that's sort of like founded on in some ways individual rights, that on the other hand, that we can't sort of live in a way where individual rights are actualized pretty much 100%, right? That fundamentally, that in order to kind of have these sort of what we think of like these ideals or these rights or whatever, that we have to have this sort of system that kind of piggybacks off of workers, off of low wage workers, right? So it's pretty much the idea, to put it in a nutshell, is like you have individual rights for some people, but then you have like these other people really struggling.
Right. Super quick, just
Mm.
to tag that. Yeah, we emphasize, or we seem to emphasize, individual rights and agency and autonomy, but in actual practice, especially when it comes to the people working these jobs, they don't actually get much autonomy.
Right,
The way your time is controlled, the way your breaks are controlled, things like that. It's really not free at all.
right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no freedom in the supermarket. Um,
Yeah.
I really appreciate this question. It's really an
Yeah,
existential type
yeah.
question. Yeah, for me, one of the things that you can see very clearly in the supermarket, I talk in the book, it's a microcosm of society. We can see people from all backgrounds come in
Mm.
there. You can be in a grocery aisle and there's like a millionaire and a single mom on Snap and then like a homeless guy, whatever, right?
Yeah.
They're all looking at the salsa, right? And this is a very rare thing where these people are in the same space together. So there's a lot that you can see there in terms of the good and the bad of our society. I think, you know, one of the things you see in the store is that individuals are not free as long as other people are suffering for their freedom, right?
Right.
We're only free as individuals if everybody around us is also free. Um, Look at the pandemic, right? What this revealed, that people who had laptop jobs or, more professional class folks got to keep their work, just went home, worked from home. Obviously the pandemic was scary and dangerous for everybody, but
Mm.
there were classes of workers, including healthcare workers, quite obviously, but also warehouse workers, meat packers, and retail workers who had to go to work, who had to keep punching in the clock. And we sort
Mhm.
of had this idea in society, oh, it's implicit, right? But it's like, these are the people that need to risk their health
Mm.
and their safety for the rest of us, because
Right.
that's just how society is, right? And I think that was really revealing in that moment. And I'm not sure as a society, everybody wanted to move on from the pandemic, me included. I don't blame anybody for that. But I don't think we've really reckoned with how revealing that was about who we believe gets to be safe, who we believe has a right to safety, and who is
Mm.
sort of expected to take risk for the rest of us. And that doesn't change now that the pandemic's over and we've all moved on. And I think there's an idea that, in terms of speaking about who's really responsible here, I talk in the book a lot about corporate power, and corporate
Mhm.
power is a mutual enemy. Corporations that, these massive conglomerates that control the retail food industry a lot and a lot of other industries, what they want us to think is that as a shopper, I have an interest that is opposed to the person working behind the check stand, right?
Mm.
For example, if that person makes more money, like if their wages go up, I'm going to have to pay more for groceries,
Mm.
right? And so that's just one example of how we see um, these two groups of people are supposedly at odds.
Right. Right.
One group benefits, one another suffers, and so we're sort of enemies in that way. But that's actually not true. One of the things that I point out in the book and that I learned while researching it is that corporations have a lot of power to raise prices, and they do. And regardless of whether somebody's making another dollar an hour in wages, the pandemic also showed that when we have a monopolized system where corporate power concentrated at the top, companies have a lot of power to just raise prices whenever they want. Um, and they shovel money to shareholders by the billions and billions rather
Hmm.
than they could raise wages, they could improve conditions in stores, but rather than do that, they could have more employees in stores so customers have better customer service. Right? If
Right.
you've ever been in a store where you feel like, where's the employee that I want to talk to about something? It's because the
Hmm.
employer is saving money on labor by not hiring enough people to help you. Right?
Right.
So our interests as shoppers and workers actually overlap. But I think the way the corporations want us to think that that our interests are opposed. And that's something I try to challenge in the book, is that actually we are all on the same side when you look at
Right.
it closely.
Right.
Mm. Something I'm really interested in. I mean, you kind of answered it just now by saying we're all on the same side, but I am curious, during your experience at the supermarket, were there times where you felt more kind of hopeful about people or more cynical about people? Because I could imagine, yes, there's that good side of it. You have that nice customer interaction. You helped somebody, you gave them service, you feel good about it. Maybe you brightened somebody's day by speaking to them if they were lonely, or just somebody you recognize that usually goes to the store. So there's that familiarity. That sounds very nice. And I imagine that's the brighter side. But then there's probably that customer is very entitled, thinks that like you're
Mm.
somebody there who's not a human. Essentially, you're like an object to kind of boss around and all of that. Not just
Mhm.
that, it's not even just how the customer is, it's also the working conditions themselves and things of that nature. So I'm just curious, kind of like how you felt during that
Yeah.
experience at times. Yeah.
I mean, most customers are incredibly kind and nice and generous and thankful, and but you can have that. There's abuse. If you talk to anybody who's worked in customer service, they'll have stories of just being treated like dirt.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And there are several stories that I tell in the book. And it can ruin your whole week. If everything's going great, you're having a great week
Hmm.
with customers, and this one person, right, can
Yeah.
really, like, for example, I had a lot of the book, there's a chapter in the book that deals with self-checkout machines and all the problems with that technology. And in one case, the machine wouldn't print out a receipt one day. And the
Hmm.
Hmm.
guy yelled at me, and I was trying to help him, and he was in a hurry, and he kind of gestured around the store and said, "Can someone come and help this idiot?"
Wow.
Wow.
Hmm.
Referencing me. I mean, this
No.
is just like, I'm sorry, I'm making $15 an hour here, guy. I'm trying to help you. And a comment like that, it could ruin your month, you know.
Wow.
You keep going over it in your mind. You're trying to sleep at night, and you're just keep hearing this. Other worse comments were made to people. There's racism from customers and homophobia that I observed on the job. I think, I talk a lot in the book about, people are under a lot of pressure in society in general. There's like an affordability crisis. There's people earn low wages in jobs of all kinds. They can't make a living, and they come to the supermarket. And I think there are just some people that see the people who work there as an easy way to, as an easy target, as an easy way to like let off some steam.
Hmm.
And it's really troubling. It's really. I also think I talk in the book about the myth that this work is low skilled.
Hmm.
Right.
It's absolutely incorrect. There's no such thing as low skilled labor. That doesn't exist. And there's a lot of skill that is required to work in a supermarket. But I think, one of the reasons abusive customers feel entitled to treat people this way is because they know retail work is low pay. And
Hmm.
so they think, oh, these workers don't have skill and they're low status in society. So that gives me the permission to treat them this way. And I make the argument that it's not that it's low skill, it's that it's low pay, which then communicates to people that these people don't count. Um, yeah, it's really troubling. And I think if somebody's been in the industry for years, they have been treated so poorly
Hmm.
that I wonder how they survived, because there's just you have to develop a really thick skin and be able to laugh it off. And that's another skill that you develop, right? Is being
Right.
able to work in that environment and not blow up at people.
Right. Can
And
I
can
just
I ask?
Okay,
Okay,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to piggyback off of this. Okay. And so the low status component, and I think so yeah, so the low status component, and then I guess the idea of thin skin or thick skin, right? So this is super interesting here. So just as like an anecdote, my mom, this is now she's retired now, but she was actually a home health aide for whatever it was about
Yes.
like 30,
Yeah.
30 years, right? And so the thing is like for her all across the board, she was pretty much treated like shit, right? Not always, obviously. I mean, there were good conversations and components of it, but the point is for the most part, like she's like every single day I have my status, like my tier, like where I am in society, I have it thrown in my face, right? So the question is going to come up of like, how does somebody develop a thick skin? Because now we're pretty much talking delusion, right? So let's say on the one hand, you have somebody who's saying like, hey, you're not worth it. You're obviously your pay reflects it in some particular way. We consider you as such, right? This is where you are in society, right? So that's the one hand. And then on the other hand, where, obviously is what happened with you, Ann, and what happened with, God knows how many supermarket employees across the country, is that they're told, well, you have to still smile, right? You have to smile, you have to be friendly, right? You have to provide, adequate and considerate customer care. And the point is, I guess I would wonder how the fuck do we expect people to do that? Because again, if we're saying develop thick skin, right? Whatever that means, right? Let's say, they'll sort of pick yourself up by the bootstrap mentality, but it's also the idea of like, oh, you have to find your inner value, right? How the fuck are people supposed to find inner value when everybody around you is telling you you're worthless?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, these people that do this work over the long term have uh, really have a skill that I do not have. One thing I would say is that what I observed on the job is that a lot of worker frustrations, they take out on each other.
Mm,
Um, because you're right. You have to smile. You have to provide that customer service. It's, what people call emotional labor, right?
yeah.
Taking care of the customer, making sure they feel good. Even people that are mean to you, right? You have to be kind. I had a shopper once, um, and I've never forgotten this. I was a supervisor, so I wasn't at the register, but I was sort of hanging around, and she went like this to me and went like this with her finger, like,
Mm.
come this way with her index
Mm.
finger, like I was a child. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of go over there and she says, this check stand is dirty.
Mm.
Don't you ever clean it? And it's in the middle of a transaction, and so people are looking at her. I mean, she seems to want to put me on the spot in front of people. I don't know. And so I'm
Mm.
trying to, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see any dirt there. I really didn't. But I'm like, okay, so I get a rag and I'm wiping down the in front of customers and other employees. I'm wiping down the. Is this okay? Does this look good to you now? I
Mm.
mean, just like sick shit, right?
Right.
Um, and so when people have that kind of stuff happen to them, there's a lot of snitching in the store between colleagues. There's a lot of taking your frustrations out on your coworker. I give a lot of teasing, a lot of mocking. I had
Mm.
one colleague who um, had a pretty serious back injury from a previous job as a home health aide, by the way. And now she was in
Wow.
a
Wow.
supermarket where you have to
Mm.
stand behind your check stand, and that puts pressure on the lower back. So
Mm.
she had a hard time getting through the shift, but she got teased by her colleagues for not being able to make it through the shift, because at that point, if you can make it, if you got a bad back, if you've got a bad hip, and there are plenty of injuries, and you can make it through the shift, this is a badge of honor, right? And so one time, another cashier said to me about this woman with the bad back. He said, she can't stand up. We're gonna have to take her out back and shoot her.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that was the kind of stuff that you would hear. So there's plenty of solidarity too and camaraderie, and that people are complicated. Somebody
Yeah.
can see something like that to an injured worker and then turn around and give her, $100 so she can make it through the week. I mean, there's complicated relationships, but there is a lot of teasing and backstabbing and snitching, and you really see how the pressure cooker that we're in, the release valve often, it comes out in ways that you target your colleagues instead of, because who are you going to target? You can't take it out on customers or bosses, and the people that are in charge of the company that set the policy. You never see them.
Right.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Wow.
Something I'm curious about is what was the typical wage at the grocery store you worked at for like let's say a full-time employee?
It
Yeah.
was about, when I was there, and this was 2021, it was just under 15 an hour.
Mm.
I made 15.80 because I was a supervisor. I describe in the book, during the pandemic, it was kind of hard to get employees to come and work at supermarkets, so they did raise wages a little bit.
Mm.
So by the time I left, it was a little bit higher than that. But that also was incredibly controversial in the store, because they said they raised the floor but not the ceiling. So
Mm.
people who are making $13 an hour got bumped to 14, but people who were making 15 did not get bumped to 16,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so this created tension in the store, because people said, like, I've been here 20 years and now they're going to raise the wage of the 19-year-old who's now going to make only $1 less than I make, and I've been here 20 years, right?
Right.
So
Wow.
that also was news. Like, I was thinking, oh great, they're going to raise wages. This will be great. Well, it'll help morale. It'll help everyone. But no, it just added another layer of tension where the veterans, people that had been there the longest, felt like they were being mistreated and disrespected in favor of boosting the pay of younger, newer employees. So yeah,
Yeah.
And forgive me for
almost nothing is like, you might,
yeah.
your assumptions don't always pan out in the supermarket.
Yep.
No, I'm with you 100%. The reason why I was asking about the wage, I'm just curious. So let's say for you, you said 15.80 an hour.
Mhm.
Um, I could do the math, I suppose, but it might take me an extra second. Out of curiosity, how much is that a year? Out of curiosity,
Oh gosh, I don't even know.
was it above 30 by any chance,
It's probably
or?
about 30. It's probably
Yeah.
about 30. All I know is that I was spending 50% of my wage on rent,
Wow, man.
The
right?
reason
So
I brought oh yeah,
yeah, yeah.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. The
No.
reason I brought that up is in relation to healthcare. So
Mhm.
funny enough, it depends what state you live in as far as
Right,
that
right,
goes,
right.
but this is a little bit of an aside, but in New York right now, there's a type of plan that was being offered to people who made between, let's say, $32,000 and $39,000 per year. There's so many people though who, maybe work, I'm guessing work at a supermarket though, and maybe are on the edge there. Maybe they are making like 32,000, let's say.
Yeah, yeah, it's possible.
Before they were getting an essentially free plan. They were, like an essential worker, they were getting something called an essential plan, right? And then that plan, due to the big beautiful bill, is going away. And then now they're going to be forced to pay hundreds of dollars per month potentially for a plan, as far as that goes.
Oh, wow.
And it's
I did not know
insane.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's in New York in particular, so that's why I'm familiar with that. I'm sure there's cuts
Yeah, across
across
the
the
country.
nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I imagine it's really hard, right? And I know in your book you also mentioned there were people who were getting food stamp benefits as well,
Yeah.
who were working there, and things of that nature. And it's really tough. You would expect that somebody, trying to work either full time or just try to have like a livable wage would be at least be able to adequately survive on that, not really struggle so hard. I could accept, okay, no problem. If somebody's earning, way higher, right? Okay, they can afford some sort of luxury, and that's fine. Or there's a different sort of discussion. But at least, if you're giving your time to a particular company, at least like something that lets you live comfortably it would be nice. Maybe I'm naive for saying that,
Mm.
but yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I thought all the time, uh, very few of the employees I worked with could afford the company health plan that was on offer. It was
Wow.
about $40 a week. So that tells you
Wow.
how much, people are struggling. I did pay
Wow.
for it because part of the reason I had gotten a job is because I didn't have health insurance and I wanted to get it. But I
Right.
frankly started to regret it,
Um,
because I heard people talk about how expensive it was. The deductible that I signed up for was about $4,000.
Fucking
So like
crazy.
Ye-
you got to pay that out before you even get really anything. And then the plan paid, I think, 80% of the cost of care if you stay in network.
Right.
I mean, so if you 80% of the cost of care, that means if I go and I have a $10,000 thing, I still owe $2,000. I don't have $2,000. Nobody else does
Right.
either. So
Right.
a lot of the few of the colleagues that I worked with bothered to sign up for the plan. And those who did, mm, really wrestled with the decision, whether it was the right decision. I worked with people have problems with their teeth. I mean, I just think
Yep.
we
ye-
should really think about this, that we have a healthcare system where your teeth are considered part of the body.
Yeah, that'd be good.
That this is insane. This is total insanity. There were so many instances of people who had toothaches who couldn't get them fixed. One cashier had no teeth really. She
Mm.
had she in fact she told me that she liked wearing the pandemic face mask. A lot of people complained about
Mm.
the masks, not because it was like COVID denialism, but
Mm-hmm.
because when you wear a mask for 8 hours, those straps dig into
Right.
your skin and it can be really, when you take it off at the end of the day, you've got these grooves in your
Right.
face.
Right.
People complained about it, but she loved it. She's like, I love my mask because nobody can see that I'm missing teeth.
Right.
And this is very common. There's something like a quarter of people over 65 in the US don't have any teeth. So some
Mm.
people have dentures. So she had to get dentures. It was $1,500 at this low income clinic. It was a whole, she had to save all this money over months and months and months and get help from friends and family to come up with this money. And I tell a story in the book about the day she got her a mold in her mouth to get fitted for dentures. She was
Mm.
under anesthesia, local anesthesia, and she couldn't really talk very easily. So she was short and snapped at a customer who was
Mm.
asking her a question. And the customer turned to me. He saw I was the supervisor. He turned to me and he said, she was rude for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And as I report in the book, I knew the reason. The reason
Right.
was that been, she didn't have any teeth. She'd been struggling a long time to save money. And then she went through this to get a mold in her mouth, which had been a little bit painful. And there's a look on the neck. She had a hard time talking. So the reason she's rude to you is rooted in poverty.
Yeah.
And I don't blame the customer for not knowing that. It's not his job to know that. There's no way he could have known that. But one of the things I encourage shoppers to do is to think like, if your cashier or the employee that you talk to in the supermarket is a little bit rude or a little bit short, maybe think, I wonder if they have adequate health care. I wonder if
Wow.
they can afford to see a doctor. I wonder if they have a toothache that they can afford to get fixed. I mean, this is quite likely why,
Mhm.
if you have a bad experience in a store, it's probably because of something like that.
Wow. Yeah. And this really goes into pretty nicely, I think, into a conversation about meritocracy and how we think of it. We, in the beginning of the show or earlier in the show, we said, what I said, like we're kind of rigid in our thinking and we sort of split things like, right. There's this and then there's that. And so when we think of meritocracy, we think of obviously like ethic, right? Work ethic. So we think, all it takes is somebody who just makes the right choices and who wants things badly enough. So I'll just use my mom as an example. I don't think she'd mind just because these are things that she would talk about on her own. So like my mom is somebody who struggled with depression for her entire life.
Hmm.
So meaning that like let's say if you have another person who's able to say like you were saying earlier and brush something off and say okay whatever this person's having a bad day whatever, right? So there are obviously people who are way more prone to mental health issues. So meaning that like you were saying and like a comment from somebody to one person might mean one thing and it might mean something else to somebody different. So it's interesting how we again view meritocracy because there's so much inequality. Not I don't even just mean financially, right? So there's inequality in terms of obviously like for just let's say privilege, right? So just basic material privilege. There's inequality obviously in terms of like intellectual gifts and just let's say personality gifts in terms of like just how outgoing you are, how energetic, how agreeable, friendly, etc., right?
Hmm.
And also, and to me this is most important just because I'm a therapist, there are also inequalities in terms of mental health. So obviously some people have like periodic and episodic depression. Some people hardly ever experience depression episodes, and somebody like my mom, she pretty much falls into depressive episodes like that. So with that being said, right, I wonder why is it so, this is just obviously going to be more of an opinion because it's kind of hard to answer or pin down the answer to this question. But Anne, why do you think it's so hard for us to take into kind of consideration all of these multitude of factors that come into or kind of contribute to what does and doesn't make somebody materially successful? Like, why is it so hard for us to see that, yeah, a person's sort of more or less innate mental health, which is, it's a predisposition, but even still, the environment like deeply affects them. Why is it so hard for us to see that, yeah, that's going to probably make a person financially unsuccessful?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I'm sorry to hear about your mom. There was a lot of depression and anxiety. I mean, again, I'm not a healthcare professional, but that I observed, and it seemed pretty obvious to me. And one of some of the research that I did for the book, because there was so much of it, I wanted to know where's this coming from? Is this, I agree there's predispositions and all of that, but what I discovered is that, for a long time we heard there's something, a relationship between serotonin, this chemical in the brain, and depression. But some researchers don't believe that, or at least they're starting to question that conclusion, and they believe that psychological distress is a product of the struggle to earn a living. And I cite one study in the book that found that poor mental health was a result of what they called the exploitation inherent in wage labor.
Hmm.
So it turns out that if you, and this is extremely common, you work your ass off, you're tired, you're treated poorly, and you earn just enough money to enable you to get up the next day and come back and do it again, right?
Right.
You don't get a vacation, you can't afford health care. It's just simply the cycle that you earn just enough to assure that you show up at the store the next day. This is a recipe for depression. It
Right.
simply is. One of the cashiers that I worked with before the pandemic, she had been a server at a high-end restaurant where she made pretty good tips, and she told me she felt almost middle class. She could take care of her kid, and she was
Mm.
okay. But she lost that job. She ended up at the supermarket, and she's like, I need to make like triple what I'm making now. It's like she said, I just feel depressed over my situation. I don't know how I'm gonna get out of this.
Right.
All right. So I think, um, there's also when you earn a low wage, and we've already talked about this a little bit, and so society's sending you the message that you're a low status person and that you do low status work that doesn't count and that you're low skilled. How
Yeah.
can that not affect your brain and your mental health? It seems impossible to me that you could. That's just not a situation that is that, that you can experience and not have some effect on you. I think, you know, I had one colleague who had a panic attack at the register and had to leave in the middle of a shift, and it was late at night, so he was the last person there. But I tell
Hmm.
the story of coming back from being in the aisles, and the check stands are empty, and there's nobody there. Um, and this I found out later that this cashier had a panic attack and had to leave. And he told me the next day that he'd been having trouble with his mental health, and he felt like he was dying, as people who
Wow.
have panic attacks often described, and he had to leave. But he left me alone to run the store by myself for the rest of the evening. which creates my own, mental health problems
Right.
and stress. So I think that we really need to consider the link between mental health and our material conditions and our struggle to earn a living. I think there's just it goes without saying that you can't be in a situation like I observed in the supermarket and maintain your positive outlook. It's very difficult.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And that puts such a hole into the idea of meritocracy because I think what we're probably going to, I think if there is going to be some sort of conclusion at some point, I think the relationship is probably bidirectional, meaning people who are more
Yeah.
so to mental health issues, they probably tend to get more exploited because it's possible. And, the exploiter could justify and say, well, we're two individuals. This person agreed to this relationship. They took the contract, whatever, right? It's not necessarily my fault, right? And then obviously the person takes on a low status job and then that low status job contributes to depression, contributes, let's say, manifestation of symptoms and so on and so forth. The cycle goes, right? But if that's the case, right? So if let's say we agree, right? And we say, okay, there's obviously going to be exploitation in the system. Let's say, fine. Let's say even hypothetically, we do blame those people and say, well, you know what? That's their job, right? That's their job to take on to see their value, right? So it's their job to see their value. It's their job to fight for a higher wage. It's their job to look for employment elsewhere. So it's not the exploiter's fault. Fine, granted. If you want to say that, whatever, right? But here's the thing, right? Because then I would say, but that pokes a hole into the idea of meritocracy. So if meritocracy rewards you for your intellect, for your skill, for your work ethic and output, right? Then fundamentally exploitation shouldn't happen in that system. That doesn't make any sense. If meritocracy is
Good
so
point.
fucking right. If it's so fucking obvious where it's like everything that you produce is essentially evident for everybody to see, exploitation shouldn't occur.
Good point.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, how ironic that, there's this exploitation going on, this scarcity for the workers in a place that represents essentially abundance, right?
Right.
Like you have
Right?
everything you need at
Flip
the
screen.
supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But again,
it's
but doesn't that again point to sort of dichotomy, right? So again,
yeah.
we're sort of we phrase or see ourselves as like this one thing, right? And then there's sort of this dark side and this behind the scenes that people don't want to look at. Okay, so then Anne, you know what? Since you've been already obviously on your book tour and you've been talking to people for some time about your book, I am curious, right? Because these are like really unsavory, inconvenient truths. So what's it been like for you to talk to people about it and for them to hear what it's like for the workers behind the supermarket counters?
Well, I have to say, I've heard from a lot of retail workers who tell me, and this is not to toot my own horn, but simply to um, point out how little people who don't work in supermarkets know about the industry.
Hmm.
People have said to me, um, "I've never seen anybody describe what the work is really like before, like this. Like there's just not a lot of public testimony, right, about what these jobs are actually like." And so it's the other thing is like you're working in this difficult job, you're being treated poorly, you're earning low wages, and nobody knows. There's
Hmm.
not like a source where you can go and get stories from people who work in supermarkets. It's another way of the work can feel invisible, right? In all
Hmm.
sorts of ways, low status and invisible in all sorts of ways. I have to say, the book doesn't come out till Tuesday. So
Hmm.
we'll get, I hopefully we'll get more readers to weigh in. I've
Yeah.
got a lot of reviews on Goodreads from people who were shocked, who
Hmm.
say, I did not know that this was going on in the retail industry. I had no idea what was going on, as you say, behind the scenes in grocery stores. And they were glad to know. I mean, I really think most of us we don't want our fellow citizens and fellow human beings to be depressed and underpaid and disrespected and mistreated. We don't want that. We want to live in a society where we know that when we go into a supermarket and we're shopping and the cashier's helping us, that this is somebody with a living wage job who has health insurance, who's chosen to be there, who is treated well. I think most of us want to live in a place where our neighbors, our friends, the people who serve us are taken care of and who feel like they're part of society. So I, that's heartening to me to hear people say this is I didn't know this and this really affected me to hear about this, and I think everybody should know what's going on behind the scenes, and hopefully my book can add just a little bit to the conversation so we can start having more discussions about what you said, meritocracy. I mean, I think the other thing I'll add is that I really think there's a pernicious idea that we have in society that people deserve their fate if they didn't get an education,
Right.
right?
Right.
You don't go to college, well, that's on you.
Hmm.
And look, if you're in a supermarket and you don't like it, well, then go to college, and then you can then we sort of have this idea, if you're college educated and then you can't find the job, or then you don't earn enough to earn a living wage, then you don't make enough to pay your bills. We sort of feel sympathy for that person. They did everything right. They checked all the boxes. And but if you didn't go to college, if you didn't manage to do that, you are responsible for what's happening to you. And this is another fiction that I try to bust in the book. There are lots of reasons why people don't go to college. Most people in America do not have college degrees. Most workers don't. And I say in the book, but first of all, college is prohibitively expensive for all but the very rich right now, and has been for a long time. And I say, college educated people have to get rid, or have to get over this idea that they deserve to live lives of comfort and dignity that aren't available to others. I think that, again, back to the existential question: if I want to feel good, if I want to be free, if I want to have my needs met, that is dependent on assuring that other people get the same thing.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And, and interesting, because like the counterpoint to that, to the argument of that, people should go to college or whatever, is what about the fact that we're now oversaturated with degrees? And there are God knows how many people, because even though, yes, I mean, I think it's something like, maybe, I don't know if this is still true, but if from the last time I looked, which was many years ago, it was something like 20% or 25% of Americans have a college degree. But now it's like, it's probably, yeah. So, and now it's probably something way more than that, But with that being said, like in New York alone, like we are oversaturated with college educated people, and those degrees are worthless. So now if you want a job, like let's say, I don't know, making 60, 70K a year, a lot of these people want graduate degrees. And you're like, wait, oh, okay. So now what's good? So now we're pushing the goalpost, right? So now it's going to be, oh, well, you should have went to grad school if you wanted a normal paying job. It's like, oh my God, where does this end?
We could talk about the degree inflation and what that looks like. And I might, uh, I might disagree with some of what you just said, but the important thing is what you said is right, in the sense that whether you can feed yourself, take care of your family, go to the doctor when you're sick, it should not depend on whether you have a college degree.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, so
that just
Alan,
seems like a basic human right to me, that
I agree with that.
Yeah,
working a job should pay a living wage, so that you don't have to, pull your a cavity out with some pliers, right? If you have a cavity or a toothache.
Yeah. Alan actually just looked it up. So what is it? 45%, right?
45% of Americans,
New
have
York,
a college degree.
was that right? Is it 45 now? Okay, that's
in
not
America,
happening.
right? So right. So then how do you even criticize people for not having college degrees when pretty much half of Americans have college degrees? So that's sort of what I'm saying, man. That's what I like really hate about the meritocracy argument, because I feel like you could just keep pushing the goalposts, right? People are just saying, well, you should have done this. Yeah. And then when they do this, it's like, well, now you should have done that. And I think the idea is that it's pretty much your responsibility to adapt to an ever-changing economy, which is fine to whatever extent I understand. But again, if now we're pushing it to graduate school, people need to understand, like, first of all, if only let's say 45% of people can get a college degree, even less than half of that are able to actually get into graduate school. Graduate school is insanely competitive. So outside of for-profit, University of Phoenix and whatever, but outside of those kind of schools, for the most part, most people can't get into graduate school. So now you're making it impossible for them to make a living wage, if that's your argument.
Right. And you're just creating, again, a reason that people who didn't manage to get in, who didn't manage to pay for it, didn't manage to be, for whatever reason, right, didn't want to. Why should I, if you don't want to, that's fine. That there are lots of reasons why people don't make that choice. But then to say, well, you deserve to be broke, and to not be able to see a doctor, and to not be able to, and to work in a job that is physically dangerous, where you're injured and where you're treated poorly, and that's on you, that doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
Something I'm curious about. Yeah, if you could implement, let's say, one policy change that could happen tomorrow, right away, tomorrow, to improve the lives of grocery workers, or even just essential workers in general, what would it be if it had to be one policy? Yeah.
Well, unionization.
Yeah.
Top of the list.
Yeah.
Easy.
Mm-hmm.
We have only about 5% of retail workers are in a union. And this is down quite significantly from just a few decades ago. In every case, unionized grocery workers earn more money and have better conditions than non-unionized workers. We have to figure out a way to return collective bargaining rights to retail workers and everybody. This is really, really tough. As I described in the book, I had a background as an activist organizer. I knew that unions were a solution to what I was observing in the store, but I still never even mentioned the word on the job. I was afraid, and I knew that my colleagues were afraid. There's a sense in a lot of these stores that it's illegal to fire workers for talking about unionizing, but stores are going to do it anyway and answer questions later. I
Right.
didn't feel that I had the right, as somebody who probably wasn't going to be in the industry forever, to encourage or to put my colleagues in a situation that might endanger them. So it's really, really, really tough. And I think retail workers are going to need a lot of support from shoppers. This is why it's so important to me to break down, to bust these like myths that we're on opposite sides, and that when workers do better, shoppers pay more, and those kinds of myths, because I think workers going to need a big assist from shoppers, from people with a bit more privilege outside the store that can help change this catastrophe of non-unionized low-wage labor in the retail industry. So that's the top of the list. I would also say this can get a little wonky, but
Please,
bear with
let's
me.
do it. Yeah.
We have a retail food industry that's incredibly monopolized. There's a lot of 2 or 3, 4 companies control the entire industry. Kroger, Walmart, Whole Foods owned by Amazon. So these are giant corporations that are controlling. So what happens when you have that kind of monopoly in the food industry? And I'm talking at the level of the store, but also at the products in the store. When you walk down the aisle of the supermarket, speaking of abundance, you think you're seeing a diversity and choice, but you're not. It's an illusion. What you're actually seeing is branding. It's, you know, it's 3 companies that own every single drink in the beverage aisle.
Sure. Yeah.
And in the yogurt, it looks like there's 20 different kinds of yogurt, and it's actually 2 companies that are selling it all.
Right.
Wow.
So this concentration at the top, monopoly in the retail industry, is a huge, huge problem, and it hurts shoppers because stores can raise prices. You can't go across town and buy something cheaper because it's the same company that owns that store, so they're charging the same prices. It also harms workers and their ability to unionize because, for example, if I am in a store and I want to unionize my colleagues, and one of the things we can say is, look, if you don't let us form a union or you don't raise our wages, we're going to quit and we're going to go work at the store across town. That store across town is owned by the same company, right? And so they're going to pay the same pay anyway. So lots and lots and lots of research shows that industry concentration results in low wages and high prices. This is another place where we have overlapping needs and overlapping concerns. So I would say at the level of the store, you've got to have unionization. And then we have to break up these giant grocery monopolies that put so much downward pressure on wages and make it so difficult to organize.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. And then I want to kind of pull on the thread that you mentioned because I think it's going to be super important. I know I have this question. I'm sure our audience will too. So you mentioned that it's not kind of, it is a myth that the more, let's say, workers, the more salaries increase. And obviously, if they're unionized, that doesn't necessarily increase, let's say, food prices or whatnot. So, okay, why would that be a myth?
It's a myth because these corporations, for example, Kroger during the pandemic made huge, 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 huge profits because of the crisis. They took that money and they sent it to shareholders, $1 billion in shareholder profit. These corporations make tons of money. They are doing fine. They make huge profits. And what they do right now, they're all financialized, right? So they all investors. They don't care about customers and they don't care about workers. They care about their investors. So when they make this profit, when Kroger made this profit during the pandemic, they sent $1 billion to shareholders. Walmart did the same thing. All these big companies do that. So that's an example. We need to have the kind of labor power and the kind of shopper power that can say to a company like this, no, you have to use this money has to come back to the store on some level. Workers need a raise, shoppers need lower prices. There's plenty of research that shows there's no direct one-to-one. This is a free market myth, right? The price, wages for the cashier goes up and I got to pay more for my Cheetos. No, corporations are taking that money and they're sending it to investors, and that's who benefits from the system. We are on the same side here. We need to join forces, shoppers and workers, ordinary people, and frankly, regulate these corporations and force them to, those profits need to come back to the community. That's not a radical demand. It's simply, do you want your cashier to have a living wage? Do you want to pay a fair price for your groceries? This is part of the solution.
Yeah. And
yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah. So I think a good question maybe I could ask that also appeals to those who have not, let's say, done grocery work before. Um, so as AI and automation transforms the workplace currently, there's a lot of people who are laid off, whether it's white collar workers or whatever, those with tech jobs, engineering, all of that. As that starts to transform those workplaces and those people lose their jobs, I guess what lessons from grocery work should we keep in mind? Yeah.
Thank you so much for asking. I guess I'm a bit of an AI skeptic. I think that they are firing people and laying people off, and they will continue to try to do that. I think a lot of it is using AI as an excuse. I'll give you an example. Just my experience in the store informed my thinking about automation, right? In all forms. I was at the store when they brought in self-checkout machines.
Right.
When I first got the job, there were no self-checkout machines at my store. It was all traditional check stands. And then a couple months, 3 months later, we got this note, okay, we're going to replace about a third of the check stands in the store with self-checkout. So this was a huge disruption. And so I was there the day they ripped out the old registers and installed these new space age, fancy machines. And so what I saw, and it's true, it was true, you would have one cashier who would monitor 6 different registers, 6 different self-checkouts. So instead of 6 cashiers, you had one person monitoring.
Right.
So it's absolutely a labor saving. And so you can totally imagine, okay, they're going to fire those other 5 cashiers or not hire them. But and I think they were trying to, that's the idea, right, behind automation. But what also happened is those machines broke down. They broke down all the time. There were problems, glitches, and as a supervisor, I would constantly have to deal with broken machines. And so what I would do is I would call a tech support hotline, and a person would answer and talk me through. So I'm at the store and I'm working, and the store is paying me to talk on the tech support line with somebody they're also paying, who's a tech support person, to help to talk me through how to fix this machine. That's labor that they're paying, right? Then sometimes the machines, if there was a big problem, guys would come in to fix them, repair people. And they would have it was sort of amazing. They had screwdrivers hanging from their belts, like they're working on an oil rig or something. And they're opening up the machines and looking at the wires and rebooting and doing. I mean, I'm just like, this is these are workers. They're now being paid to come and fix these machines. So I just doubted whether saving, yes, maybe they didn't have to hire these cashiers to run these machines, but they have to hire all these other people to take care of the technology.
Right.
Another thing I'll say is that the self-checkout machines were where many of the tensions and arguments and bad encounters between workers and shoppers occurred. When a machine breaks down, it's frustrating for people on both sides of the transaction. I already mentioned the shopper that called me an idiot when I didn't know how to fix the machine. There are countless examples of this, of frustrated customers and workers trying to figure out how to, and customers don't know how to operate the machines, and why should they? That's not their job. But you have to enter a produce code when you're buying a cucumber, and shoppers don't always know how to do this. You have to show your ID when you're buying alcohol, so you have to wait for somebody to come over. There's just plenty of research, both by personal experience and research, that these self-checkout machines aren't actually any faster than the regular check stand. It's the myth of convenience, as I describe it in the book. But also, I just felt like there was plenty of evidence that these machines, they were an attempt to cut labor, an attempt at efficiencies. You're trying to squeeze out as much as you can as the corporation. It didn't always work. You need human beings to work at the supermarket, and I just and especially if you want somebody there who is going to be nice to you and smile to you, all the wonderful things about a supermarket: customer service, knowing your cashier by name, they ask how your kids are doing, they know what you like to eat for taco night, right? None of that's possible if we just replace it all with automated labor, and so it exacts a social cost as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the more shocking aspects of your book, if not the most shocking aspect of your book, is so essentially, I'm just going to go back to the argument that a person would have made. They would have said, well, if we increase their wages, obviously then prices would increase, right? But there's a great point that you make that I think puts such a hole into that argument, where essentially you talk about the overabundance in these stores, that there's a lot of waste, right? And to me, I'm reading this and I'm like, this is fucking crazy. So on the one hand, they're saying, hey, we can't pay these people, but then on the other hand, there's so much waste. So just as we, before we start wrapping up, so can we actually talk about that that again, just kind of again putting a kind of knifing the myth a little bit that like that these corporations only have so much money and so much funds to give. That no, they deal with overabundance, and they do that for particular reasons, for obviously for more money, but for particular reasons that have nothing to do with the good of anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I mean, what I learned researching the book is that the food industry, there's tremendous amount of waste in the food industry. There are losses all along the supply chain, like from farms where food is mishandled. You have to transport it, then you have to store it. You have to keep it away from rodents and insects. But in stores also, there's a tremendous amount of waste. One study said that about 31% of food waste happens after food already reaches stores. And so that
Mm,
happens because stores over order, right?
Mm,
If you're a manager, you want a shopper to walk into a store and see the shelves full of choice and full
right.
of products. You don't want to walk into a supermarket and see like half the shelves are empty. What's going on here? So stores
mm,
over order and they end up throwing out a lot of the products that expire, that go bad. Um, One worker who worked in the deli at my store, we had this case where the rotisserie chickens, were spinning in the case, and shoppers would come and buy that case had to be full at all times, he told me,
Mm,
because it looks abundant, right? Nobody wants to, you walk up to the chicken, there's like one chicken in there spinning. That looks a little weird.
mm,
So they would always fill, at the end of the night, they threw away a dozen or more chickens
wow.
because if they didn't sell them, they threw them away.
Right.
So it's the appearance of abundance, the appearance of diversity and choice creates a lot of waste that frankly is bad for the environment and it's wasteful in terms of spending.
Wow, man. Yeah, and then so wow. And then so one of my final questions is going to be, because this is so important to me. So in college I read Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed, which I loved and was just so fucking blown away by. So can you tell us about like how she was maybe not the foundation, but a foundation for your work and her influence on you?
She's foundation for my work in all sorts of ways. For one thing, I have the support of a journalism nonprofit called
Mm,
the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, and she
mhm,
founded that organization. So that organization funds working class journalists like me, people who don't necessarily, um, uh, who don't have traditional careers in journalism but want to write about economic precarity. So I am grateful to Barbara for founding that organization, which made this book possible because I couldn't have written it without the support. But also in the store itself, when I started thinking about, okay, I've got to write about this, there's a lot going on here that I want to share with the world. Obviously, Nickel and Dimes came to mind as the sort of foundational text for this kind of book. And so I reread it. I obviously read it years before, but I reread it and started thinking about, um, you know, writing my book sort of as a companion, if you will,
mhm.
to hers. Um, she she really made it possible, I think, to write a book like the one I wrote. When I started trying to sell the book, um, my agent said, "Okay, this is a Barbara Ehrenreich um, type book," and people immediately go, "Oh, okay, we get that." Right? I
mm-hmm.
mean, imagine trying to sell a book about a supermarket without.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a lot harder if she hadn't sort of paved the way.
Right.
So, thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, man. And I certainly think your work is on her level, man. So really, really
Oh,
fantastic stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
appreciate
100%.
you. Appreciate you.
Yeah,
Absolutely. All right, Alan. Final questions before we wrap up.
absolutely. Yes. So if we wanted to follow you, follow your work, and of course buy the book, where can we do that?
Well, you can buy the book anywhere books are sold. I recommend a nonprofit, sort of like bookshop.org, the my preference. You can also follow my work at economichardship.org. And I also have a website, annlarsonwrites.com.
I love it. And thank
Awesome.
you so much. This was legit one of my favorite episodes ever.
Same
Oh,
here.
thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I didn't know about your podcast before, but now I've listened to a few episodes and I love it. And so I'm obsessed now. So I'm gonna be
Oh,
a
I
fan.
love it. Thank you. That means so much coming from you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Take
Take
care.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. All right. That's awesome. So, again, everyone, if you'd like to follow us, you could follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, on X, where it sees underscore podcast. Like, subscribe,
Hit
hit
the
the
bell
bell
on
on
YouTube.
YouTube. And again, thank you so much for watching and see you next time.